Creative Art Academy, and today we're going to talk about watercolor materials. Watercolor is such a complex and nuanced medium, and there's a lot out there for people who are beginners to it. And this is kind of a preface to the watercolor tutorial I'm going to be doing, and it's just about supplies. So if you are feeling overwhelmed by all the different options out there and you want some guidance as to like what to buy, what to look for, what to concentrate on, like what to see on a label to see if something is good quality or not, this is the video for you. I'm going to be going over all the papers, all the paints, etc. that I use, and just talking about the differences between them and what might work for you versus somebody else based on the way you paint and what you want to accomplish. So the first thing we're going to talk about with watercolor supplies is paper. And there are a lot of different types of watercolor paper. Some are good quality, some are bad quality. The main thing to know about watercolor paper is that the fibers of paper are smushed together like this in a mesh. And with most paper, that mesh is very thin. It's only one layer thick. For example, with very thin drawing paper, like printer paper you might find. It's thin enough that when a very thin layer of ink goes on top of it, it's not going to buckle. The thing that makes paper buckle or fall apart is that these fibers are dried like this, and when you add water to them, that's going to cause them to expand like this. And since the area around the paper, since the whole paper isn't getting wet, has nowhere to go, it's either going to, because there's all this extra space within a small part, it's going to buckle up or it's going to buckle in. And that's where you get those pockets or like humps in watercolor paper that isn't super high quality. And if you use a ton of water, then you need thicker paper, because the things that stops these from forming is that if the watercolor hits this first layer of paper and the mesh starts to come undone, if there are 4, 5, 6 layers beneath it that the water isn't fully reaching, that are keeping it bound together, it's not going to fully buckle because the water can't soak all the way through. So when you're paying for nice watercolor paper, you're paying for paper that is either like very tightly compressed, so it doesn't, when it expands, it doesn't expand so much that the paper buckles, or it's very thick so that the paper doesn't have, the paper has like some underlying strength to it. There are some papers too where there's some sort of coating over the top that stops the water from sinking in right away. And this can be a good and a bad thing. It takes forever to dry, but that seepage doesn't happen immediately, and so it has a little bit of time to dry and you're not getting such a thick amount of water in it. If you work with a pretty dry version of watercolor, like you don't put a lot of water on your brush, you're doing a lot of dry on dry painting, then this isn't as important. But if you use really heavy watercolor washes, then it's going to be very noticeable. Because whenever these peaks and valleys form, the peak is the watercolor is going to run off of it, and you're going to get a lighter area there, and the valley, a lot of watercolor is going to pool into it, and you're going to get a darker area of pigment there. And that variation can look beautiful to some extent. If the paper dries and it's not especially great quality, those buckles can stay. And also you might just get variation where you don't want it, and you want to be as in control of your medium as possible to have the effect that you want. There are two kinds of watercolor paper. There's hot press and cold press. Hot press paper is paper that has been like pre-soaked in water, and so everything has already expanded. You're not getting as much expansion when you use water on your watercolor paper because the fibers are already pulled out like this. That is fantastic for buckling, and for people who use drier mediums and don't have huge amounts of water covering the paper, this can be fantastic because you're going to get zero variation in like how like curvy or wavy your paper may get. For people who use a ton of water, keep in mind that the fibers are already stretched out, and watercolor can only go on paper so many times or so much before those papers start to fall apart. On hot press paper, when you use a lot of water, you're more likely to get these little bits of paper that are just kind of coming off, and they add texture to the watercolor because they're going to absorb some of it, and they're going to be like little rolls, and they look almost like fine little grains to some degree. When you start getting those, that means that your paper is pretty much shot, and if you put anything more down on it, it's going to look really bad because it's seeping more directly into the paper once that top coating is worn off, and it's going to look rougher, and it's going to look darker in that area, and it's going to be very hard to get fine detail because that detail is going to spread even if you do a fine line, because you're you're basically painting inside the paper at that point. So if you use a ton of water, go with cold press. If you use water sparingly, hot press can be good if you worry about buckling. If you want just a super smooth surface to work on, you might want to go with cold press. So some of the watercolor papers that I like is this Strathmore Ready Cut watercolor paper. I just get it online, and one thing that I really like about it is that it's pre-cut to 8x10 or 5x7, which is a standard frame size. And since I specialize in watercolor pet portraits, people are generally framing this work. It is hot press because I tend not to use a ton of water in my work. The disadvantages are that you have to buy them in packs of 10. It can be a little bit more expensive if you don't want things of very specific size. You know, it's hard to cut down. These other are mostly cold press. The only other brand that I recommend that also does hot press, and this is a hot press version, is Arches. Arches Aquarelle. It is expensive. These are watercolor blocks. So if I open this, you can see there's actually this open area here, and the rest of this is sealed with wax. And so what you do is you paint on it. I have a partially completed painting on this side. And once you're done, you take a knife and you just cut out your single page. And this stops it from buckling too much or from the edges from curling up while you're painting. They sell hot press, they sell cold press. I think the cold press is the green one, hot press is pink. And I know they have a blue version, I forget what that is, but this is crazy expensive. I very seldomly use it unless I have a really important project I'm doing, but it is fantastic quality. I love it. Now, if you're looking for something a little cheaper, Strathmore has a cold press watercolor sheet that does pretty well. Unlike the hot press, Arches is so smooth, and the other hot press is decently smooth. You can, I guess it's kind of hard to see here, but you can see a little bit that there's some tooth to this, and it's still pretty smooth. It's still pretty good quality. I'd say it's very good quality. It's pretty thick. You can tell how thick something is by how many pounds it is. So it says down here 140 pounds. To give you an idea, decent quality sketchbook paper that is not meant for paint is about 70 pounds, 70 to 80 pounds. So you want something that is around 140 or higher. Another 140 watercolor paper is Canson's Watercolor Pad. It is very similar where it comes in a block. It's a little harder to see because the wax is white. It looks like this. It is decent quality as well. It's 140 pounds. This is cold press. And then if you want something that you feel like you can just practice with, where you don't have to spend a whole lot of time like thinking about it, and you can, you know, rip stuff up pretty easily, these Canson XL pads are pretty good for that. They're a lot cheaper. I still think they're very good quality, but you can buy them at like Walmart even. And there are a lot of other stores that carry them. And they're just inexpensive, and they're good for practicing. And one thing that I really like about these is that they come in all different sizes. So you can get like a little sketchbook size, but it goes all the way up to like this freaking big. You can get huge pads of it. The Strathmore watercolor paper also has a huge, like I don't think it's quite poster size, but it's big. It has a huge version if you want to do really big work. My last recommendation is Strathmore's mixed media paper. Now, mixed media paper is going to be a lot smoother than their watercolor. However, it doesn't hold water as well. When they say mixed media, they mean you can put a little bit of water on it, but it's going to buckle majorly if you use any significant amount of water. So mixed media is really just good if you want to literally mix media. So if you want to do some pastel, if you want to do, you know, some colored pencil and then add little bits of watercolor in or something, I think it's fine for experimentation, but generally for watercolor painters, I would recommend watercolor paper specifically. Other brands can be good. You can just look at how many pounds it is, see if it's at least 140. If it's above 140, that means it is better quality. It's more tightly compressed. Those fibers are going to be less likely to pull apart. Another thing that I love is the Moleskine brand. And the Moleskine brand, the pages are actually really, really thin. And they have like a little bit of a coating on them so that they don't buckle too much. And I don't get that much buckling with these. Again, I use a pretty dry wash for my stuff. I'm not super liquidy. But I think these are really fun. They sell a pocket size, and they also sell like a more of a like notebook sized ones. But they're leather bound and I think they're really pretty, and I still think the quality is very good. Moleskine in general is a great brand. You know, this is kind of an optional material, but masking fluid I think is really helpful for watercolor. It looks like this. This is Misket. It says liquid frisket on it, but it is masking fluid, and this is by Grumbacher. There's also a Winsor Newton one that has like a little bit of a yellowish tint. This one is orange. What you do is you shake it up until the orange is all gone, because you have to shake these in order for them to mix properly before you use them. And what you're essentially doing is you're painting with liquid rubber. So if you use this with a brush, it will ruin the brush. So you want to have a separate, like not so nice brush set aside just for use on this. I think I got like one of the a brush pack at Michael's, and you can see it's like completely hard. Like this isn't moving. This is just for applying masking fluid to things. I also like using these like dipping pen nibs. So the pen nib holders you can find online. This is Brause brand, Brause. And the nibs I found on jetpens.com. And these are the Zebra G pens. They're used by manga artists. You get really fine lines with them. Once you're done with this, you either take the dipping pen or your brush and you draw on paper. The paper has to be completely dry. If it's wet at all, you will ruin the paper. But draw on the paper and it's going to seal it over. So whatever you paint on top of this is going to stay completely white. So for example, if you want to paint a cat and the cat has white whiskers, painting around tiny, tiny whiskers multiple times is going to be next to impossible. But if you paint those whiskers in masking fluid, you can then wait for the masking fluid to dry, paint everything you want, and then go back through and with these things called rubber erasers or rubber squares, you just rub against the dried masking fluid and it comes off like rubber, because it is rubber, and it leaves a perfectly white impression. Okay, so for brushes, I recommend splurging. So if you can either pick nice paper, nice paint, or nice brushes, I would definitely recommend brushes, because brushes give you the most amount of control over how your paint is released. If you have not great quality paint, your paint may be a little gloppy, but if you have a really precise brush, you can still direct it, or it may not be quite as saturated or whatever, but you can always enhance that later by just like scrolling up on your saturation on your phone or something. So brushes give you the best control. There are a few different brands that I'd recommend. My absolute favorite that I use for all my professional work are Raphael Kolinski brushes. You can tell because they have a little orange end on them. And for brush sizes, I would recommend having a really big brush. This is called a mop brush for large areas of water. Something kind of in between. So the mop brush is size 10. This is a size 3. And these are good for like slightly bigger areas where you want to fill things in and you want a little bit of detail. And then a really fine detail brush. This is size 0. But you could go up to 1 or 2 and it would still be a pretty good detail brush. And I think having a set of at least 3 is good to start off with. These are probably the most expensive out of all my brushes, and they last for a really long time. The main difference between a great brush and a not so great brush is that when you wet this, let me get some water and show you. A brush that is good is gonna come to a really fine tip at the end. So I'll show you on my big brush because that's easier to notice. So you can see it's got like a fan shape here. And when I get it wet, and not when it's like completely wet, because then it'll be kind of like that. But when I, kind of dry that off and I get it damp but not wet, it's going to come to a fine point. And this brush could come to a finer point. Honestly, it's kind of old. But if it comes to a really fine point, that means you can get a very precise line with it, even though it's big. Now, with the brushes that I use more often, also, which are kind of new, or not new, they're like a year old, but newer, you can see it's a much more precise tip. These are used for detail work. The way brushes work is there's all this glue holding them together, and they're coming out and then jumping to a point. And when you mash paint into them, and paint gets up to here, or when you push down on a brush, you are pulling that glue apart. And what's compressing all of these and causing them to be perfectly straight so that they can come to a point is getting loosened. And so for brushes that aren't made quite as well, that binding isn't as tight and that glue isn't as well made. So as you push on them and as you wear on them over time, they're going to start to come apart. So if I like put pressure on this, you can see the tip is coming apart. And that's essentially what's happening inside the brush as you continue to use it and wear on it, until it's pulled apart so much that, you know, you get kind of a fan effect at the end, even when the brush hasn't been pulled apart physically. It's the part on the inside that is getting pulled apart. And then the brush is no longer good. You can't really get a fine point with it, and you can't get those precise lines. So a really good quality brush, you're not going to see that quality until you've used it over time, especially if you take good care of it. The great thing about watercolor is it's water soluble, so you don't have to worry about paint getting mashed into it because you can always leave it in water for a minute and it'll dissolve. Brushes that aren't great quality, they're just going to come apart a lot faster. So initially you're not going to be able to tell the difference, but pretty soon, and once you've been painting for a little while, you'll notice that difference. If you want something that's not quite as hyper expensive as Raphael Kolinski, but you still want it to be pretty good, the Windsor Newton Series 7 brushes are pretty good as well. And these I don't have a mock brush for, I just have the one mock brush for my other ones, but I have a size 3 and a size, oh, this is worn off, but I think it's a 0 or a 1. And these work really well too. I like them. I'm very happy with the quality. They don't last quite as long. Like this I've had for literally since I graduated college, more years ago than I care to say. But it's worked really well. It's still in great shape. One other nice brand that I think is really good quality is Blick's Master Sable. They were gifted to me originally, and I was feeling very skeptical about them because you can see I've sanded off these edges, but these brushes were so freaking long. So if you like to paint from a distance, which is technically how you're supposed to paint, you're not supposed to hunch in like a gremlin like I do, and get really close to the paper. If you want to paint from farther away, these can work. Usually you don't saw off the ends and then sand them. So I don't think I would buy them again just because of the length, but as far as the brush quality, they've held together pretty well, and I do like them. Sable brushes are just like synthetic hair. You can get brushes that are like squirrel hair, and actually I think I have one. This is a squirrel hair brush. You can see little bits of it are coming off a little bit, but they're just really fine hairs. And because of that, and there's so many of them that come together, like they do create like a really fine point like this when they're wet. It's not something I would invest in necessarily, but I do think they're cool. Okay, and then lastly, if you really can't afford to buy really expensive brushes right now, you're like, oh hey, this is just a passing hobby and I'm not sure if I want to get really into this first. The Windsor Newton Cotman collection, they have at Michael's, and this is like the nice version of what they have at Michael's. I think specifically if it says watercolor, Windsor Newton Cotman can be decent. I think they last just fine. I don't think they're bad quality. What I would recommend against is getting those giant packs of brushes that are just all different sizes, all different kinds. They're kind of generic. Those don't last very long. Use those for your masking fluid, but don't use them for watercolor because they're going to fall apart pretty fast and you're not going to be able to get the kind of line and quality that you want. In regards to palettes, there are a bunch of things you can use. I wouldn't recommend one thing in particular because honestly I don't think palette itself is super important. You can use palette paper, you can use wax paper, you can use tinfoil even if you don't have something on hand, as long as it repels water so that you can mix on it. There are ceramic palettes. This is one of the palettes that I tend to use. This is ceramic. It came with one of my watercolor sets. And I think it's nice. It's really good quality, but you can just as easily get those $2 plastic palettes at Michael's and it's just fine. Some watercolor cases will have built-in palettes and you can use those. Here's a travel watercolor case that you can buy them empty and it comes with its own palette that you can add to. So if you're buying paint by the tube and you want a palette to store them in, I got this at Blick's. I added the ribbon to it, but it comes like this. So you've got an empty tray and then when you flip it over, it's got all of these places to put paint. And then it's got another mixing tray. So you basically have 2 mixing trays and a place to put your palette. And this one actually comes up as well, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to pop all my paint out. And then there's another tray under that. And so I think this one's really versatile. It's a little big, but if you're if you're doing a lot of stuff on location, like plein air, I think these are pretty decent quality. But you can get stuff like this everywhere, and there are metal versions that are better quality than this as well. This one is plastic. Now getting into paints, there are so many different kinds of watercolor paints. And I'll say, if you want super, super vibrant colors that mix in a way that's very creamy, that's like dissolves very evenly, you can pay for really high quality colors. Bad colors are going to be a little more clumpy. They're going to take more work to dissolve them and to get an even mix. And the saturation probably won't be quite as intense. That's the main difference between a $100 watercolor and a $2 watercolor. And when you're working professionally and it's really important to get those vibrant colors and to get good mixes to save on time, then invest in the really nice ones. But there is nothing wrong with just getting these like Reeves value packs that look like this and using those while you're getting started. Keep in mind that watercolor is a water heavy medium. You're not going to be going through these very fast. So it's not like acrylic where you go through a tube very quickly. You're going to be using this for a very long time. So if you want to get a starter pack that's not crazy high quality, maybe once you've gone through it, the second time you buy, you splurge on something that's going to last you like a couple years and be really nice and easy to mix. The Reeves packs like come in a bunch of different colors. I just have them in this like Jane Austen fake book because I think they're prettier than just leaving them in the packaging. But they look like this and you can find them anywhere. They're kind of the default. Aquarelle is a really nice brand. And again, they're more expensive. You can buy the tubes individually or you can usually buy packs or set hardened palettes. In general, I think Aquarelle and also Windsor Newton are both really good brands. Windsor Newton is like, I would say a good middle of the road brand. Like if you want it to be nice, but you don't want it to be so nice that you're spending an arm and a leg on it. Liquitex is also a good brand to use. You can find most of these at Blix. And I also have this one called My Artscape, which was given to me as a gift, and I like it just fine. I don't think they're bad by any means. They're not as amazing as my Schminky watercolors, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is my Schminky case, and it's actually very old. It's from several boxes ago, but they stopped making the boxes out of wood and made them out of plastic. So whenever I get a new one, I just switch it out for this box because I like the box better. But it comes with a ceramic palette, and the palettes used to be little circles and they changed to this. So I actually have two, and I use them both a fair amount. And it looks like this. These are all going to come like labeled and sealed, and you have to take them all off. And it comes with like one of these little palette things where you do a sample of every single color. And then you can do like one wash versus two washes to see how thick it is. And you can just see how vibrant these colors are and how beautiful these watercolors are. This is probably the most expensive piece of art supplies that I own. But this has lasted me like years. I think the first one I had when it was like completely done, it lasted me like 6 years, and I paint a lot, like a lot. Finally, I want to show you just a fun like set of colors that you don't necessarily need, but they're fun to play with. So these are Ganassi or Janassi Tambi. And this is an metallic set, and this is their pearlescent set. The pearlescent comes in different tints, and these are all different shades of gold and silver. And playing with metallic and pearlescent watercolors can be really pretty. You can mix them in with other things or give a pearlescent sheen to something that you need to feel kind of special. I will say these don't read super well in photos or scans as pearlescent. Like they do look kind of sparkly, but it's not the same effect as when you see them in person. So if you're doing something for in-person display or that's going to be framed and the original is going to be shown, these are really fun. I think I got these at Mido actually, but there are a bunch of like indie art stores that carry them, and Blix may have them. I'm going to try and put links for everything down below. And the last thing I want to talk about is pencils. So when you're drawing and working and you want to see like the underlying line art on your piece, you may want to have some pencil showing through. So pencils come anywhere from like 6 or 8B to 6 or 8H. So B stands for bold, and then there's HB, which is in the middle, and then H stands for hard. The harder the lead is, the fainter the line will be because the charcoal or the graphite is compressed to the point where not very much of it is coming off when you draw. Whereas if it's bold, there's going to be a much looser compression, so a lot of it is coming off when you draw. I either use just like a regular yellow pencil, or I use a 2H, and I draw pretty lightly. I don't have a very heavy hand. If you do not want your line to show, but you want to paint it and have that underlying your painting, then I would go pretty hard. A 2H is great if you have a really light hand, but if you don't, if you have a heavier hand, go higher on the scale 4H. So get like a 4H or a 5H. You can buy these individual at Blick's and some Michaels, like just the bigger like superstores seem to have them individually. Also, if you want pen line to show, Micron ink is waterproof. So you can draw with microns and then paint over them and the line won't smudge at all, which is fantastic. I really like their pen, PN, and I usually get like an 03, an 01, and a 005. And I mean, you can see the 005 is like freaking tiny. Also, this one is worn out, so the nib is a little lower. And then this is what like a 0.3 looks like. Be careful because they do have a brush version of this. And while the brush pen is pretty, for some reason that one is not waterproof. If you want to be a little extra and kind of old-timey, or if you want to paint your line, but you know, you don't want to get it to smudge because you don't want to use like brush pen ink, Daler Rowney FW ink is acrylic, and so that also won't smudge. Once you lay it down, it's permanent and you can paint on top of it. I have black and sepia here, and I also, because I use it so much, I have these giant refill bottles, and they come with like a dropper, and you just drop a couple drops into your palette and make sure that you're not mixing this with watercolor, because once this dries, even if it's mixed with something, it's not going to come up again. So you want to make sure you keep it separate and then you wipe it off your palette when you're done. If it gets stuck to your palette, I find that Windex gets it out pretty easily, although you can buy a special like pen nib cleaner that gets ink off of pen nibs, and that works for your palettes too. Now, one thing with watercolor is that once you paint it over something, you can't ever make it lighter again. So one extra thing that I like to keep are paint pens in white so that I can go back and add little highlights to things if I want. It's a lot easier if you forgot to do masking fluid, or if you want something to be a little bit less of an extreme highlight than masking fluid. I like using these Uniball Signo brand gel pens, but the Jelly Roll ones work decently well as well. And I also have the Uniball ones in silver and gold to add like metallic tints to things occasionally, although I use these very sparingly because if you use them too much, you can easily make something look a little tacky. I would not recommend the metallic Sharpies. They bleed a little too much into the paper and they don't hold their metallic sheen as well as these do. And with that, you should be ready to start painting. You should have all the information you need to make informed choices about the sort of supplies you're getting. And if you have any questions about supplies that you've heard of, or if you want a demo or more explanation on something, feel free to drop a comment and I'm happy to answer with a video or reply to you. I'm going to be working on a basic intro to watercolor tutorial on how to use these supplies next. And until then, like and follow and all that good stuff. Subscribe.